Hi guys, we are still in John chapter 9, continuing on in the story of the man who was born blind and healed by Jesus. So we already know from last time that Jesus has walked by this particular beggar man, and his disciples asked him who had sinned. What was the cause of this defect? Why was he suffering this way? And they assumed that it could be traced back to someone else's sin. And so at that, Jesus made some mud with his spit, and he made the man go and wash, and he healed this guy from a lifetime of suffering instantly. And he instructed his disciples that it was not sin that had caused this blindness, but the blindness was given to this man for the glory of God. That was the reason that he was blind all of those years. And that's a little bit hard to accept, but that's what Jesus taught. So I say, take that, false teachers who blame other people's faith and someone else's sin for any and all sickness and suffering. It isn't always that. Sometimes we can have a consequence of sin and it result in suffering, and there are certainly consequences for sin that end in suffering, but it isn't always that. Sometimes God allows us to be afflicted for his own glory, and that is the end of the story. So Jesus says this. So the people that had lived in this community began to notice. Everyone who knew this man saw this. They saw this transition. I mean, how could you not see this? Here's a guy who's been blind and begging on the corner his entire life. You walk by him every day. They saw him all the time for years. Now he's well. Now he can see. Now he doesn't have to beg. And so everyone, of course, is talking and saying, well, isn't that the blind beggar? Like, isn't that him? Like, what? How? They're asking, how? How is this possible? This doesn't happen, right? Some people said, surely that's him. Like, yeah, definitely that's him. We know him. But others disagreed and said it was just someone who maybe looks like him or looks a lot like him. Maybe he has a twin, right? They couldn't believe it. And yet the man himself kept confirming the truth, saying, yeah, it's me. It definitely is me. And so then they say, well, then how? How is this possible? And he says, Jesus. Jesus did this, right? He told me to go wash, and now I can see. And so the next question, which I think is very natural and important to note, the next question they asked was about Jesus's whereabouts. Where is this Jesus that has done this for you? And so while the man didn't know where Jesus had gone by this point in time, I think it's important that we see a natural progression of thought and action when Jesus causes a blind man to see is for those who witness it to begin to search for the miracle maker. That's how it's supposed to work. When Jesus makes we blind people see by washing us clean in his holy water, a radical change ought to be very obvious in our lives and to all of those around us. And so others who have known us, in turn, they have no choice but to begin searching for the someone who has instigated that change, right? It's a very natural reaction. You see a miracle take place. You see somebody's life completely changed. And you say, well, what happened to you? And that person says, Jesus. I met Jesus and he has cleansed me. He has healed me. The next thing that usually happens or should happen is for those people who recognize this absolute radical change in you, go and begin to search for him. Because they should want to see him. They should want to know him. They should want to see what he has for them, right? That's a natural progression. So the people begin to search for Jesus. Where would you go if you wanted to find him, right? In today's day and age even. Then and now. It's the same thing. Where did the people go? The people went to the most religious place that they could think of, right? They very likely went to the synagogue and they found the religious leaders. That's who they brought back to this blind man who could now see. So they bring the religious leaders back. And, you know, most of anyone who doesn't know the Lord or doesn't know anything about religion or God, when looking for God, when something sparks their interest to think, oh, maybe I should go look for God, they would do the same thing that these people did. They would go to a church, they would go to a holy place, and they would seek out the most religious people, right? That's what we would do. That's the only thing we know to do, right? Just like if we're looking for a mechanic, we're going to go to the garage, right? So this is what they do. They bring back the religious leaders to the once blind man, and then those guys begin to question him, and they too ask, how? These are the religious experts, though, so like, that's why these people go and get them. These guys know more than we do about, these religious matters. So we're just going to go get them, and we're going to see how he interacts with these guys, right? And so these religious men, the Pharisees and all, they begin to ask the blind man who can now see, how? How did this happen? And the man answers, once again, Jesus. Jesus did this. And so now we begin to have a problem. Some of the religious leaders believe that because they know that blind man cannot just begin to see all of a sudden apart from some miraculous force being present, surely Jesus is God. Nobody can do this. And they've already seen many miracles. They've already seen the lame man healed. They've already seen the water turned into wine. They've seen, what else have they seen? The woman caught in adultery. They've seen him interact with her. But they've seen all of these things happening. And so they know this can't be, it can't be apart from God. So surely he's God. So some of the religious men begin believing at this point. And others say, surely not. Surely not. What do they base their miracle denying proof upon? Rules. Religious men love rules, right? Can't be true. Can't be true because it ain't. It's not happening within our guidelines and within our rules that we have set up for everyone. And ain't nobody allowed to be healed on the Sabbath. So, nope, sorry. Doesn't work here. So, says who though, right? I mean, has anyone really come before making blind people see and making lame people walk? I mean, how did they set this precedent, right? Like, where did this law come from, guys? And who says, yeah, you're not allowed to work on the Sabbath? But this isn't that, right? And this is the God of the universe doing that which he came to do, which is to seek and save the lost and to heal the sick. So who says you can't heal someone on the Sabbath? I mean, who's ever even done that before, right? Oh, you guys say that, right? You who care more about being the kings of your own little religious kingdoms than you do about the lifelong suffering of other people in your own community. You who are desperately afraid that Jesus might just be the real deal and be about to take your place, right? I see you. You're the blind ones, right? Right. So they all go to the blind man together and they ask him, who is Jesus really? Who is he really? And the man says he doesn't really know Jesus, but what he does know is that before he was blind, and now he can see. And that guy is who made it possible. And surely he's some kind of prophet. I don't know who he is, guys. I'm not the most religious guy. I've been sitting here begging blind for all these years, but I know one thing, and that guy healed me. So who he is, I don't know. But he must be someone pretty special, right? But still, the religious men do not believe, or should I say they will not believe, because at this point it is surely a matter of their stubborn, immovable will. So they go now to the man's parents. They just don't stop, do they? Again they go to his parents, and again they ask how. How is this possible, right? Notice when you read in this text, which I'm going to read a little portion here in a second, but notice this man's parents, they say they don't know how this has happened. They tell these guys to ask him, but this is their son, right? They've known him all their lives, and they surely have been the very first ones that he would have told of his good fortune. They knew. So why wouldn't they say that Jesus did this? Because that's all they were really being asked, right? How did this happen? Here's what the scripture says. This is John 9:20 through 22. We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. He will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. So, that's why. Here's what we've got going on here. Sounds so familiar, guys. There we go. The impostor kings, the religious men who didn't want Jesus as their king, or they didn't want Jesus as the king in the synagogue or in the religious places that they had rule and run of. They were using their oppressive, abusive authority, again, to fearmonger and to falsify anything true that Jesus did out of sheer jealousy. So, let me tell you something. Putting people out of the synagogue isn't the worst thing that can happen to a person. Ask me how I know. It hurts. It's hostile. It's divisive, and it's demonic. But it is not worse than failing to confess the truth when the truth is standing right in front of you. When the truth has just miraculously saved you and made you from a blind person to a seeing person. The worst thing you can do is deny him, right? So who would want to be oppressed by a place who only pretends, a people who only pretends to love God anyway? Not me. So being put out of the synagogue as they were fear-mongering over people if they should confess Jesus as the true king that he was, it's not the worst thing. Maybe it would be good for some people to get out of that synagogue because it's being run by people who don't worship God rightly, who don't honor God rightly, who don't love God rightly, who don't care about people rightly. So this isn't the worst thing. It surely isn't. The worst thing is denying Christ and his goodness and his truth among your peers. Okay, but these parents didn't want to fight. They wanted peace. They wanted false peace, because that's what it is. They wanted comfort, complacency. They didn't want this stigma over their name or their household that comes with standing for what's really right. They would rather their own son go down alone than to have to go down with him. Even though this Jesus did them a great miracle and a great service in caring for their beggar son and using him as a great instrument of God's glory. It mattered little to them, apparently, that Jesus did this for their son. And what mattered to them most was staying safe, staying comfortable. And what mattered most to them was not being caught in any ugly crossfire or religious outcasting. Oh no, we don't want that. So they were scared. And, the abuse of authority accomplished their goals in instilling these fears in people. And so they refused to risk anything. And guess what, guys? That's not something that we have the liberty of doing when we're following Christ. But they wouldn't risk anything even when they had received the greatest benefits from Jesus Christ himself. Okay. Excuse me. So anyway, religious bullying and oppression is still happening today. In fact, it has never been in fuller force, if you ask me. If you stand up for the truth and point to Jesus as the only rightful king, mark my words, religious men will not put up with you. They won't. They don't. And you don't believe me? Try confronting things that they sweep under the rug. Things like gossip, partiality, favoritism, greed, jealousy within the assembly. Because they're all there, guys. Yes, they are. You'll be put out of the synagogue the second your position is truly seen. And it's unfortunate, but guess what? It's not the worst thing that could happen. The worst thing that could happen is that you deny Christ in his rightful place within his church, because it's his bride, not these religious bullies. And so even before that, you'll probably be warned. You'll probably be threatened like these people were. You'll be oppressed by the powers if you'll not just be quiet and sit pretty in your pew, you'll be the next to get the boot. And you'll be someone who isn't allowed to belong. It's just that simple. And so this is how Satan oppressed and suppressed the gospel truth then, and it is how he oppresses and suppresses the gospel truth now. Fear, intimidation, religious bullying, ostracism, excommunication, oppressive peer shunning. And if you don't see it, and you've never seen this, you simply haven't stood up for Jesus enough. And that's the God's honest truth. And if you don't believe me, ask the blind beggar who could now see. Ask Martin Luther, since it does happen to be his favorite day, Reformation Day today. Ask Kanye.
I found this on the web for his favorite day, Reformation.
Oh my goodness. Sorry about that. But ask Kanye, ask me. If you don't abide by the religious rules, and if you make Jesus the ultimate king over the religious bullies, you will not be welcome in their synagogues, because that's what they are. They're their places. They're their kingdoms. They're their churches. Jesus is not king there. And anyone who stands up seeing that and exposing it will be put out just the same. So, carry on though. Again, being ostracized, being told you don't belong, being put out of the synagogue, as these men warned, for the sake of the gospel and for the sake of elevating Jesus to his rightful place as king. That's what we are. That's what we're about, and that's what matters. So carry on, Christian soldiers. We're in a war. Don't forget that. And history always repeats. So all we need to do is know the scriptures to know that this is nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun, as Ecclesiastes says. We got to be faithful, because only Jesus is the king. And there's nobody in this world that's going to allow me to deny that fact, that it's not going to happen. So let's be faithful to him as he's faithful to us. He made us see, right? We were blind and now we see. So praise God. Thanks for listening. I hope that's helpful.